simply claiming something is a conspiracy theory doesn't necessarily make it false. Not anymore. And the more that comes out about Epstein, including still very mysterious circumstances surrounding his death in custody, means that I'm willing to at least consider alternative narratives other than the one being fed to us through official channels. Now, joining me now is the author and investigative journalist, Vicky Ward, the author of War Against the Jews, and Jeffrey Epstein's former lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, and the man I mentioned in my monologue, physicist and podcaster, Eric Weinstein. Thank you all so much for being with me tonight. First of all, Vicky Ward, if I may, you were commissioned to write an incredibly important article way back in 2003 about Jeffrey Epstein. It was called The Talented Mr. Epstein, and you've since said that there were significant efforts to sort of keep some of your revelations out. What exactly happened there?
Well, what happened there was Jeffrey Epstein. He was an extraordinary manipulator, not just of young, vulnerable women, but of rich, powerful men. And, what happened in my reporting was that, I still don't know all of the details, but I had the on-the-record allegations of two sisters, two women, and those allegations were cut from my story. And Jeffrey Epstein had gone to great lengths to meet with then editor of Vanity Fair, and at the same time, Jeffrey Epstein was a formidable person to write about. He threatened me. I was pregnant with my children, and he told me that if he didn't like what I wrote, he would have a witch doctor place a curse on my unborn children. He told me he'd found out where I was giving birth. I add, this didn't stop me from reporting the absolute best that I could, and I did debunk some of the claims he made about his own financial, professional life. But the whole thing was, Douglas, a nightmare.
Can I ask you also, Vicky, just quickly, were there any of the names that were released today which surprised you?
No, I didn't know about David Copperfield, and I don't think I'd read about Stephen Hawking. But no, they didn't surprise me. I mean, I've been covering this story for over 2 decades. So I was very familiar with a lot of this. I mean, what it just did was solidify a picture by putting specific names in places. But I think that, unfortunately, the documents still don't show a different part of Jeffrey Epstein's life, which is the manipulation of the powerful people. It was a horrific portrait of this horrific sexual subculture in his homes, but it didn't explain why people like Bill Clinton and massive philanthropists like Leslie Wexner, why they wanted to be around this man. And I'm sure your other guests are going to have a lot of insight into that, because it wasn't because he had a whole group of underage women around him.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I just come next to Alan Dershowitz? Thank you so much, Professor Dershowitz, for being with us. First of all, of course, you were Epstein's lawyer at one point, and you were also named in these released documents today. How do you respond to this?
Well, first of all, the woman who accused me has now admitted that she may have confused me with someone else, may have been a case of mistaken identity, and she's dropped all of her legal charges. I first met Jeffrey Epstein. I was introduced to him by the Lady Rothschild. She asked me to meet him because he was a major contributor at Harvard. And I agreed to meet with him, and I went to some seminars that he conducted at Harvard, with the president of Harvard, with major academic figures. But from the day I met Jeffrey Epstein till the day he died, I have had sexual contact with one woman and one woman only, my wife. And so I was one of those who wanted these papers to be released. My disappointment is that only some have been released. I want everything to be released because they will confirm the fact that I did nothing wrong. And they would also shed light on other people who have been accused, some truthfully, some some falsely. But the key point is that we can't have just partial releases of material. In many of these cases, the accusation is there, but the rebuttal is not there, or the disproof is not there. So for the public to form a valid judgment, you need a full release. I don't need that, because in my case, the woman who accused me has admitted that she may have mistaken me for someone else, but I think others may very well need the full evidence to be exculpated and to prove. But some don't want it, because they may very well.
On that, just very quickly, I mean, President Clinton is mentioned more than 50 times in these documents, and he maintains he never visited Epstein's island. Donald Trump's also mentioned in there. But do you think politicians and others should explain their exact links with Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, for example, I'll give you a story. I was having dinner, this is a name-dropping story, with Caroline Kennedy, the former president's daughter, and her husband, and Bill Clinton, and another couple. And the phone rang. This was on Martha's Vineyard. And he was president. The Secret Service gave him the phone. He went away, walked for about 15 minutes, had a vibrant conversation. I didn't hear it. And then he came back with the phone and saying, Alan, somebody wants to say hello to you. And he handed me the phone. It was Jeffrey Epstein. So this was way before any accusations or anything was suggested about Epstein. But obviously, Clinton and Epstein had a friendship. And in most cases, in my case, for example, my friendship totally terminated the day the accusations came out. I did serve as his lawyer, but never again socialized with him once I had heard these accusations. I think that's probably true of some people. In other cases, people continued to have a friendship with him even after he served his sentence in prison. And they do have some explaining to do, but that doesn't prove guilty. Just bad.
Let me bring in Eric Weinstein, who's been patiently waiting in LA. Eric, we heard earlier a bit of your description of Jeffrey Epstein. You met him once more than 20 years ago. Can you just quickly, briefly recap what your impression was?
Simply that he was introduced to me in a financial context. I was interested in investment in a so-called carry trade in foreign exchange. He didn't seem to have any interest in that. He said that he was a currency trader. There was no obvious evidence that he was a currency trader. He didn't speak like one. And he seemed to be very interested, as per the previous comment about Stephen Hawking, in my work on what might be called post-Einsteinian physics. In particular, if you check out his sponsorship of a conference that he held in the Virgin Islands called Confronting Gravity, he was very interested in science. This obviously is an area with potential military applications. He was a very strange person from beginning to end. I don't really believe
when you say that he was a strange person, I mean, describe some of the things that were odd in that first meeting, that one meeting you had.
Sure. I don't hear anyone mention the fact that he used an American flag as a tablecloth, making his dinner table look like both a coffin and a trap for you to stain the flag of your own country. He brought in a woman who I think he introduced as an heiress who was braless, that he bounced on his leg at a financial meeting in an attempt to create a distraction. The whole thing was completely surreal from beginning to end. I think one thing that you can learn about this is that he created an incredibly intriguing world. There was no hint. I think this was like 2003, 2004. So this is before he gets into trouble in Florida. And, you know, the whole thing was like a scene out of a movie, and you both wanted to be nowhere close and to know everything about it. And I walked out of there, called my wife and said, I just met a human being who does not appear to be a normal human being. He appears to be a construct. Somebody appears to have constructed something that looks like a financier, but if you scratch the surface, doesn't behave like one, doesn't seem to know a lot about science, although he's very interested in science. Nothing made any sense. Up was down, left was right, black was white.
Well, we're going to have to take a short break, but I want to keep all three of you here because I want to get back after the break into this really crucial question of who Jeffrey Epstein actually might have been. Who do we think he was? We'll be talking about that and much more after the break. Welcome back to Uncensored. Still with me today are author and investigative journalist Vicky Ward, author of The War Against the Jews, and Jeffrey Epstein's former defense lawyer Alan Dershowitz, and the physicist Eric Weinstein. Let me just very quickly, Eric, I just wanted to ask you quickly what you were saying before the break. What is the actual allegation you're making? Who do you think Jeffrey Epstein actually was?
I don't know. That's a great question. But I knew that he wasn't who he said he was almost from the instant I started speaking to him. If I had to make a guess, and you're calling for speculation, I would say that he really belonged to what is almost certainly the covert operations community, and that he did not appear to have a prime broker. Nobody seemed to have traded with him. Nobody seems to ask questions around him. So it's very suspicious that we don't, for example, ask for Form 13F. If he was a major hedge fund trader, it's almost impossible to move through the markets without leaving a wake. If you have to speculate, I would say that he probably belonged to covert operations for one or more nations, and that what we're looking at is a very strange, you can shake your head, Alan, but it's also the case that I don't necessarily believe that you stopped associating with him personally at the time of his conviction in Florida, because I think there are pictures of you at the Program for Evolutionary Dynamics, socializing with Pinker, Trivers. I don't know. You tell me.
I'm going to have to go back to Alan Dershowitz on that. Alan Dershowitz, how do you respond?
All before that, no, he was not a member of any intelligence agencies. I'm quite sure of that. And he was not a hedge fund guy. In fact, once, you never want to tell humorous stories about Jeffrey Epstein, but he once said to me he wanted to sue a newspaper for defamation. And I said, why did they call you a pedophile? He said, no, they called me a hedge fund guy. He was very upset at being called a hedge fund guy. I don't know what his financial business was, but I can be relatively certain he was not an asset for the Mossad.
Can I just ask why, Alan Dershowitz, can I just ask why you're so certain about this? Because it does seem to have been an intelligence gathering operation of some kind, or a compromat situation, or a blackmail situation, something like that, surely.
It's possible, but I never saw any evidence of that. He was a guy from Brooklyn, grew up in Coney Island. He was very curious. He wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He didn't know as much about science as he thought he did. But I can tell you that people like Steven Pinker and people like Stephen Gould and people like the president of Harvard thought he asked good questions during the seminars that we all attended. Those seminars, I never attended a seminar after I represented him. My relationship did terminate. I continued to take his phone calls after that. Look, I don't know who Jeffrey Epstein is. He was very, very, I didn't even want to meet him initially, but Lady Rothschild insisted. And then some people at Harvard said they wanted me to put together some people to attend seminars of his. And I did that. And we learned a lot. I met people at Harvard that I had never known, even been on the faculty for 50 years, men and women.
Vicky Ward, let me just come back to Vicky Ward quickly. You've been waiting patiently, but I mean, a man who apparently boasted to associates that he had compromising material, film footage and others of important individuals. And that's not the normal way in which anyone behaves, is it?
Right, Douglas. So, I mean, one thing we did learn in the papers that came out last night is that, you know, he did, in some of the depositions, ask the women who claimed that they were sent out to men to give them very detailed descriptions of what had happened so that he could use it to blackmail them. I've never seen that spelled out quite so specifically before. And then to your point about, you know, the question, who was Jeffrey Epstein? Here's what we do know that is not speculative. He did know the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He did know Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of the United Arab Emirates. He did know very well Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel. That pictures of all of these men. There's a picture of him, I believe, with the Pope. There was a picture, a picture of him of all sorts of world leaders. And we know that even after he got out of jail in 2010, you know, he was clever enough to use the connections he had with the academics, with the former president of Harvard, with these other world leaders, to draw in other billionaires like Bill Gates. He understood how very rich, powerful people around the world connect with each other. He understood what very rich, powerful people want from each other. He understood how to connect the plutocracy and the elite. Does that mean he was an asset? I don't, there is speculation, but it is, he certainly was a manipulator of the 0.001%.
Eric Weinstein, quickly, just coming back to you, if I may, quickly. I think a name that quite a lot of people have been rather surprised to see on this list for perhaps several reasons is the late Professor Stephen Hawking. What on earth are we meant to make of this?
Well, I mean, there's two separate things. One is that the state of physics is bizarre in that it's one of the most consequential things you could possibly study for military purposes. And at the same time, it has been sort of more or less run into the ground. So Stephen Hawking was of interest probably for the same reason that Jeffrey Epstein was much more interested in talking to me about post-Einsteinian gravity than he was in talking about carry trades. And what Professor Dershowitz says is very strange to me, because he advertised to me that he was a currency trader running a massive hedge fund out of the Villard House in New York on Madison Avenue. And I dropped off documents there. So something is really not gelling. And one of the really interesting things would be to have very extensive discussions to try to figure out who this person is, because the person who presented himself to me was much more like the person who presented himself to Vicky than the person who presented himself to Alan Dershowitz. Now, what I would say is that he had also extensive contacts, apparently, with the Harvard mathematics department, both through Benedict Gross and through Martin Nowak. Harvard is all through this story, and as we are learning, Harvard is a very strange place. I was there for about 20 years. It is sort of an extension of the US government in an unacknowledged capacity, and it has the only university to really have the power to effectively change the narrative of academics, in particular very consequential fields. Now, the other thing about Stephen Hawking that you should just know is you should probably do a search on the word San Bernardino and Stephen Hawking. It was not a secret that Professor Hawking had a very healthy appetite for life, and that this is not a new revelation, nor is the fact that he was associated with Jeffrey Epstein a new revelation. So that there's something very peculiar about the way in which we are forgetting a tremendous amount. I would also recommend looking up the name Craig Spence if the suggestion that this sounds like a completely insane idea that he was connected to intelligence. Craig Spence is the antecedent, apparently, of Jeffrey Epstein. It's just very strange that all these things made the papers. There's extensive documentation on the internet. We pretend that we don't know.
Let me just go quickly. Alan Dershowitz, I guess he wanted to come back in.
Well, of course he knew Stephen Hawking's. There are newspaper reports about Stephen Hawking's having come to a conference on his island where he had conferences. So far, not a single one of the names that have come out has surprised me. I had heard all of it before, but as the judge in the Second Circuit, Cabranes, once said, if there's an accusation made in court papers, it's to be less believed than an accusation made to the media. Because if the accusation is made to the media and it's false, you can sue for defamation. Whereas if the accusation is made in court papers, there's a privilege. And so the judge said, look skeptically at accusations made in court papers. Look, I want everything out. I want all the theories out there, all the documents. Let the public decide. There are people who don't want things. They have things to hide. But people like me who have nothing to hide, who are not in any way embarrassed about any of these revelations, because we know we did nothing wrong. We're the ones who want all these papers out, all these documents out, and I'm hoping the judge will now release everything, every single document.
Alan, I find that very interesting because one of the things that I find very intriguing is that Jeffrey Epstein appeared to know all sorts of things about me that were not public and seemed to require almost a periscope into my life, in particular scientific things about me that probably flowed through the Harvard department that I was from which I took my PhD. I don't think that you're grasping how strong the circumstantial case is that this person was somehow attached to intelligence and may have benefited from things like state secret privilege and other forms of exotica in the law.
Let me finish with just asking a very quick but pretty important question of each of you, one by one, if you may, just very quickly. Of course, the other thing that makes the whole thing bizarre is the manner of his death. Did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself, Vicky?
I think that whatever happened, he had help. It didn't happen just by himself.
Alan Dershowitz?
I have the same view. I think he probably killed himself, probably paid off guards to close the TV and other things, but I don't exclude the possibility that there may have been third parties involved. I'm not sure. That's why I want to complete everything coming out. Enough speculation, enough inference. Let's get to the facts.
And Eric Weinstein?
If I had to speculate, I would say that I've never met a person less likely to terminate his own life from embarrassment than Jeffrey Epstein. I would put him first on the list of a person who would be undaunted by being worldwide known as a sex offender.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vicky Ward in New York, Alan Dershowitz in Delaware, and Eric Weinstein in LA. It's a great pleasure to have you all on. Thank you.